She walked into the principal's office, clutching her application, her hands shaking from hope. But instead of congratulations, he looked her dead in the eyes and said, "Students like you don't belong here." Her dreams shattered in a single sentence, and the entire school turned against her. What no one expected was that the same girl they tried to erase would become the most honored student in their history. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The hallway outside the principal's office was unnervingly silent, except for the steady tick of the old clock above the door. Aaliyah Carter sat stiffly in the wooden chair, clutching a folder of papers so tightly that the edges had begun to curl in her hands. She was only 14, but her posture was disciplined, her hair neatly braided, and her navy blue cardigan buttoned all the way up, as if her appearance alone might make her more convincing. Inside that folder was everything she believed would speak for her. Test scores that placed her in the top percentile of her grade, essays she had written with a quiet passion, and letters from 2 teachers who insisted she deserved a spot in the school's advanced honors program. The door creaked open, and the secretary's voice floated out. "The principal will see you now." Aaliyah rose quickly, smoothing her skirt, and stepped into the office. The space was larger than she expected, lined with certificates and photographs of smiling students shaking hands with the principal at graduations past. Behind the wide oak desk sat Principal William Hawthorne, a tall man in his late 50s with neatly combed gray hair and eyes that flickered with impatience even before he spoke. Aaliyah offered a polite smile as she approached. "Good morning, sir. Thank you for meeting with me." Her hands trembled slightly as she placed the folder on his desk. "I brought my application for the honors program. I've met all the requirements, and my teacher—" He raised a hand, cutting her off before she could finish. The gesture was subtle, but it felt like a door slamming shut. He picked up the folder, flipping through the pages without real interest, and then set it down again. "Yes, I've seen your file." His tone was flat. "Your grades are respectable." Respectable. The word stung. She had scored higher than almost everyone in her class, but the way he said it made it sound ordinary, unremarkable. "I've worked really hard," Aaliyah said softly, gathering her courage. "I know I can handle the coursework. I just want the chance to prove it." The principal leaned back in his chair, studying her with a cool detachment. "The honors program isn't just about grades. It's about fit. It requires students who represent the values and traditions of our school." Aaliyah blinked, confused. I can represent our school. I want." His lips curved into a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Miss Carter, let me be frank. Students like you often struggle in that environment. It sets them up for disappointment. We don't want to place you in a position where you'll inevitably fall behind." Her heart dropped. "Students like me?" she repeated quietly, as if making sure she'd heard correctly. He folded his hands together, as if the matter was already settled. "Yes, you'd be better off focusing on the standard track. That's where you'll succeed." For a moment she couldn't breathe. She thought of her mother's late nights working double shifts, of the encouragement her English teacher gave her after reading her essays, of the hours she spent poring over textbooks instead of hanging out after school. All of it suddenly felt like it had been dismissed in a single breath. She swallowed hard. "Sir, please, I know I can do this. I've already been studying ahead." His expression hardened. "This isn't up for debate, Miss Carter. The honors program is full. You should be proud of the opportunities you already have. Don't overreach." Overreach. The word echoed in her mind like an accusation. He wasn't telling her she wasn't ready. He was telling her she didn't belong. She turned and walked toward the door, her shoulders rigid. Every step felt heavy, like the carpet beneath her feet was pulling her down. Just as her hand reached the doorknob, she heard it, his voice muttered under his breath, low but sharp enough to slice through her. "They always think they're exceptions." Her fingers froze on the knob. The words sank deep, heavier than the rejection itself. She stood there, her back to him, pulse racing in her ears. He hadn't intended for her to hear, but she had. The air in the office seemed to thicken, pressing against her lungs. For one fleeting moment, she imagined turning around, slamming her folder on his desk, and demanding he see her for who she was. But she didn't. Instead, she opened the door and stepped out, carrying with her the sting of a sentence that would echo in her memory far longer than the meeting itself. The secretary glanced up as Aaliyah passed, her eyes flickering with something pity, perhaps, or indifference. Aaliyah couldn't tell. She kept walking through the hallway lined with lockers, past the posters about excellence and opportunity plastered on the walls, her vision blurring with unshed tears. She gripped her folder tighter, as if holding it together might hold her together too. In her mind, her mother's voice replayed, steady and certain. You're more than what they say about you. Never forget that. But as she crossed the courtyard, Hawthorne's muttered words replayed louder. They always think they're exceptions. For the first time, Aaliyah wondered, had she been foolish to believe she could be different? The thought gnawed at her, even as a strange flicker of defiance stirred beneath it. If he truly believed she didn't belong, then maybe proving him wrong was the only path forward. Yet before she could resolve what that meant, she caught sight of something at the far edge of the courtyard. Two students standing near the teacher's lounge, one of them pointing toward her, the other laughing, a slip of paper crumpled in one boy's hand, her name scrawled across it in large letters. Her stomach dropped. Had the principal's rejection already spread beyond those walls? Aaliyah froze, realizing whatever those boys were holding had her name on it, and whatever it was, it would change the way her peers saw her before the day was over. The walk home from school felt longer than usual. Aaliyah's sneakers scuffed against the cracked sidewalk, her eyes fixed on the folded sheet of paper she had pulled from the boys' hands earlier that afternoon. They had been laughing when she approached, but their grins faltered when she snatched it from them. The words scrawled across the page were crude, ugly, not honors material, just another charity case. She hadn't shown it to anyone. She slipped it into her backpack, carrying it home like an invisible bruise. By the time she reached her neighborhood, the air smelled faintly of fried chicken and car exhaust. The Carters lived in a two-bedroom apartment, on the third floor of a weathered brick building. The paint on the stairwell peeled in strips, and the banister wobbled beneath her hand as she climbed. But inside apartment 3B, the world softened. Her mother, Aaliyah Carter, was already home, apron tied around her waist, stirring a pot on the stove. Danielle was 37 but looked older, her posture bent slightly from years of double shifts at the hospital cafeteria. Her hair was tied back in a simple bun, her eyes tired yet warm. "Hey, baby girl," Danielle greeted, her voice carrying a mix of exhaustion and love. "How was school?" Aaliyah hesitated, the weight of the principal's rejection and the cruel note pressed against her chest. She thought about telling her, but the words stuck in her throat. Danielle had enough burdens already. "It was fine," Aaliyah lied, forcing a small smile. From the couch, Marcus, her 12-year-old brother, chimed in. "Fine? You're always fine. You never tell us anything." He was sprawled out with a comic book in hand, legs bouncing with restless energy. Marcus had Danielle's sharp wit, but none of Aaliyah's restraint. "Leave your sister alone," Danielle said, swatting the air with her spoon. "She's got her own way of talking." Aaliyah dropped her backpack by the door and sat at the kitchen table. The smell of collard greens filled the air, grounding her. Here in this small, cluttered apartment, she wasn't the exception, or not honors material, she was just Aaliyah. Dinner was simple: cornbread, greens, and fried catfish. Danielle had managed to bring home from the cafeteria. The family gathered around the table, hands clasped. Danielle led the blessing, her voice steady. "Lord, thank you for keeping us today. Give us strength for tomorrow. Amen." As they ate, Marcus launched into a story about his gym teacher tripping over a basketball, and Danielle laughed so hard she nearly dropped her fork. For a moment, the heaviness Aaliyah carried seemed to loosen, but it didn't disappear. After dinner, Aaliyah retreated to her room. Her walls were lined with library books stacked neatly, journals filled with scribbled equations, and essays tucked under her bed. She sat at her desk, pulling out the paper from her backpack. Her eyes traced the hateful words again, her jaw tightening. She crumpled it and stuffed it deep into the trash bin. She opened her math textbook, but the numbers swam before her. Instead, her mind drifted back to Principal Hawthorne's office, his dismissive tone, and that muttered phrase, "They always think they're exceptions." For the first time, she wondered if her family really knew what she was up against. Danielle worked too hard to be weighed down with more worry, and Marcus was too young to understand. Later that evening, while Marcus dozed on the couch, and Aaliyah sat in her room pretending to study, Danielle retreated to her bedroom with a stack of unopened mail. Most of it was bills. She paid them in silence, her lips moving as she calculated what could wait and what couldn't. Then she opened a letter from the school district. Her eyes scanned the page, and her breath caught. The letter wasn't about Marcus's attendance or some generic policy update. It was about Aaliyah. The district had revised the criteria for honors eligibility. Starting immediately, only students who had been recommended by the principal's office would be considered for advanced placement. Danielle's hands trembled. She knew exactly what this meant. Hawthorne's rejection wasn't just personal, it was institutional. He had effectively blocked her daughter from opportunities she had already earned. She pressed the paper to her lap and buried her face in her hands. For years she had suspected the school system carried quiet biases, but seeing it in writing shattered something inside her. Aaliyah, restless in her room, padded down the hallway for a glass of water. As she passed her mother's door, she heard the sound, soft, muffled sobs. She froze, her hand hovering over the doorknob. Danielle never cried in front of them. Never. She was the strong one, the shield against the world's sharp edges. Hearing her now cracked the image Aaliyah had always carried. She leaned closer, careful not to make a sound. Inside, Danielle whispered through her tears. Why do they always have to make her prove herself twice as hard? Why isn't once enough? Aaliyah's heart twisted. She pressed her back to the wall, sliding down until she was crouched on the hallway floor. The words cut deeper than the principal's rejection, deeper than the cruel note from her classmates. Her mother knew. She had always known. For years, Danielle had told her to keep her head high, to be twice as prepared, twice as polite, twice as strong. Aaliyah had thought it was just advice, a way of teaching discipline, but now she understood. It was armor. Her mother had seen the battlefield long before she stepped onto it. Tears stung Aaliyah's eyes, but she didn't move. She stayed crouched in the dim hallway, listening to the quiet sound of her mother's grief. And then, through the thin walls, she heard Danielle whisper something else, something that made her blood run cold. Aaliyah's breath caught. She wanted to burst into the room, to demand answers, to see the letter for herself, but her body remained frozen. Because if her mother was right, then this fight was much bigger than a single rejection. It was a system designed to keep her exactly where she was. Aaliyah sat in the hallway, trembling, knowing her mother held a letter that could change everything. The question burned inside her. What had the school district written that was bad enough to make Aaliyah Carter cry? She rose from the hallway carpet with the soft rasp of denim against paint, wiped her face with the cuff of her sweater, and slipped back to her room. The apartment was quiet again, Marcus snoring on the couch, the bathroom fan humming, her mother's door closed over the sound of folded paper. Aaliyah opened a notebook and wrote a single sentence on the first line, pressing so hard the pencil tip snapped. Be so precise they can't misread you. She sharpened the pencil, wrote it again, and underlined can't. Then she slept, face down on the page. Morning thinned the sky to a pale band over the buildings. At school, the flags snapped in a dry wind as students poured through the double doors. Aaliyah moved with them, the backpack strap biting her shoulder, the crumpled insult still buried in the trash at home, but echoing all the same. Homeroom buzzed with chatter. A poster of famous alumni grinned from the wall, a collage of faces that didn't look like hers. Miss Pritchard took attendance and paused on Aaliyah's name as if tasting a spice she didn't use. Miss Carter, she said, tapping her pen. Let's make sure you're staying on top of your standard course load. Honors is a different pace. I'm aware, Aaliyah replied, steady. Ms. Pritchard's smile was bright and empty. Good. Ambition is admirable, when it matches reality. The class giggled softly, not unkindly, but not in her defense. Aaliyah wrote the day's objective, interpret theme through textual evidence on the margin of her notebook, and circled it until the ink bled. In English, they analyzed a poem about a river that remembered the mountains. Aaliyah lifted her hand and, when called on, mapped the metaphor with quiet clarity. How memory can be a source and a burden. How history pulls even when you're flowing forward. The room stilled, just for a breath. Then Mr. Talbot cleared his throat and said, Interesting, but let's stick to the author's intended meaning, as if her interpretation couldn't lead to intention. He wrote another student's answer on the board. Aaliyah dated the page, drew a line beneath her notes, and didn't look up again. In social studies, Mr. Crawley handed back quizzes. Aaliyah saw the red 84 and felt the small jolt of wrongness. 2 questions marked incorrect, that were in fact right. She approached his desk after the bell. Paper unfolded like a flag. Mr. Crawley glanced at the sheet and set it aside without checking. We can't nitpick half points all day, Miss Carter. These aren't half points, she said. They changed the grade. He moved her quiz to the corner of his desk as if it were a flyer he'd deal with later. We're finished for today. She felt the heat up her neck, but only nodded. Outside the door, two boys drifted past, and she caught a murmur. Charity schedule, and the she of a quick elbow. She didn't turn. The hallway smelled like pencil shavings, and something burnt from the cafeteria. By third period science, the slow accumulation of being brushed aside felt like dust under her eyelids. Mrs. Lee divided the class into lab groups. The boy assigned to Aaliyah, tall, athletic, polite in a way that had edges, handed her the stopwatch and said, "You do timing, I'll do the write-up." They ran the experiment, recorded precise measurements, and when it came time to calculate the rate of reaction, Aaliyah reached for the worksheet. "I've got it," he said lightly, pulling the paper away. "You miscopied the average," she said, just as lightly. "You're about to report an impossible increase." He hesitated, then scribbled out his number without looking at her. "Good catch." At the end of class, he stapled the packet, wrote his name first in wide letters, and left a narrow line for hers. She signed A. Carter, like a whisper. Lunch was a tray of chicken patties and square pizza cut with the precision of a ruler. Aaliyah sat near the window with Marcus's friend Brianna. Same grade, same bus stop. A laugh that splashed. Brianna chattered about a dance team tryout. Aaliyah nodded, grateful for the ordinary. On the other side of the cafeteria, a table erupted when a phone flashed an image and someone said, "Nah, for real?" she asked, followed by a wave of laughter that made no sense until she heard, "Honors," and then it made all the sense in the world. She ate the crusts of her pizza and stared out at the parking lot where a security guard wound through the cars like a thread. She told herself to breathe. Be so precise they can't misread you. After lunch, the guidance office smelled like warm paper. Posters promised futures in navy blues and emerald greens. College, trades, service, options as smooth as brochure gloss. Miss Blakely, the counselor, typed with nails that clicked like a metronome. Aaliyah stood at the desk with a printed schedule request form she'd filled out weeks ago. Geometry enrichment, an independent study proposal, a request to audit an AP lesson twice a week. "I turned this in already," Aaliyah said. "Just checking the status." Ms. Blakely's smile was practiced kindness. "We've had some updates." She swiveled her monitor slightly. Not enough to share, just enough to show power. Per new district guidelines, principal recommendation is required for any enrichment beyond the standard track. Yours says not recommended at this time, concerns regarding fit. Aaliyah felt the words land with the dullness of a bruise already forming. "Who wrote that?" "The principal. I never spoke with him about." She stopped because she had, and it had ended with a sentence no one was meant to hear. "May I see the note?"
Fine. The most suffocating word.
A printer spit a page on the small table near the door, and for a heartbeat the office was empty of attention. Aaliyah took her copy and reached for the new page by reflex. The header read Student Growth Plan, Internal Draft. Under a list of students, she saw her name and a line of text. Recommend extracurricular engagement to build confidence, not a strong candidate for accelerated placement. She blinked. The page trembled slightly in her hand. Miss Blakely turned, and Aaliyah placed it back with care, as if it might break. No one said anything. The silence was a fact all its own. The afternoon settled into a rhythm of small erasures. In art, a teacher praised a fair drawing of a hand, and passed over Aaliyah's precise charcoal cityscape with a gentle lovely next. In health, a slideshow titled Resilience displayed a smiling stock photo. Family with skin several shades lighter than hers, while the teacher said success is a matter of mindset, and did not ask who decides which mindsets count. Fifth period math. Room 214, had the chalk dust smell of effort. Mr. Egan, the usual teacher, was out, and a sign on the door read, "Visiting teacher, please be prepared." Inside, stacks of sealed test papers sat on the front table, with a post-it, "Leave for period 6, on the board. In sloppy but confident handwriting, an equation ran like a dare across the green, a system of non-linear functions, intersecting in a narrow set of solutions, topped by a line. Extra credit, find all real intersections, show reasoning. The class murmured. They were not period 6, they were standard track algebra. The problem wasn't for them. The substitute, a young woman with a lanyard of school IDs from different districts, took attendance and then gave them a worksheet of review problems. "The board is for later," she said, with the easy tone of someone not paid enough to argue. "Phones away, please." She finished the worksheet, and stared at the blank space after her last answer. Her heartbeat steadied into something that wasn't anger and wasn't fear. It was precision. The room hushed, curiosity washing across the rows. Someone snorted. Someone whispered, "She thinks she's honors." Aaliyah set the chalk to the board and began. She moved through the problem like she was walking home in the dark and knew every cracked sidewalk. She isolated variables, tested constraints, rejected extraneous roots before they could pretend to belong. She explained with the chalk itself, just enough words to make her steps visible. The chalk dust found the grooves of her fingers and smudged the side of her palm as she reached the part where weaker algebra would flood the page with error. She didn't flood it. She paused, drew a small box around a subtle assumption, and corrected it in front of everyone. A desk creaked. The substitute glanced up, lips parting as if to intervene, and then did not. A giggle burst and died. The room tilted toward her, attention accumulating. Aaliyah found the final pair of intersections, not pretty numbers but true ones, and boxed them. She wrote check and did, quickly, not to show off but to quiet the part of her that demanded proof. Then she set the chalk down softly. "Done," she said, to no one in particular. The substitute opened her mouth again, closed it and eventually said, "Return to your seats, please." It wasn't a reprimand. It was a way to restore the old arrangement of things. Aaliyah wiped her fingers on a tissue and sat. Her chest rose and fell in a near smile she didn't let out. Around her there were looks. Some amused, some annoyed. A few complicated shapes she couldn't name. She expected the moment to dissolve, like every other, into a shrug of polite dismissal. But it didn't dissolve. A figure passed by the narrow window in the door, reversed, and paused. The door handle clicked down. Quietly, a man stepped inside, mid-30s, a worn leather satchel, a tie loosened by a long day, the kind of alertness that made a room sharper. He looked from the stack labeled Leave for Period 6R to the board, where a student's handwriting had just drawn a clean map through a problem meant for someone else. No one spoke. The substitute straightened. The man's gaze traveled the chalk lines, landed on the small correction box, and stayed there. "Who worked this?" he asked, voice calm and curious, not challenging. No one moved. Aaliyah felt her pulse in her wrists. She kept her eyes on her desk and told herself not to want anything. The man took a step, then another, reading the proof the way some people read a poem. His mouth curved not into a smile but into attention. He looked up, and the room felt suddenly narrower, as if paper walls had slid closer. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said to the substitute. "I must have left my tests." His eyes returned to the board, and something like recognition flickered there. Of the work, not yet the worker. Aaliyah's pencil rolled off her desk and tapped the linoleum. The sound was tiny and enormous at once. The man turned his head toward the noise, saw her chalk-dusted fingers where they rested on her lap, and stopped. He didn't speak again. He just noticed, and in the fragile second before anyone else pieced it together, the air shifted, as if the floor itself had leaned toward a different future. The visiting teacher's gaze fixed on Aaliyah's chalk-streaked hands, and he took a breath as if to say her name, though they had never met. The classroom was still. Dust drifted through a beam of sunlight that angled across the chalkboard where Aaliyah's solution remained. Every number and line a quiet declaration. The substitute teacher fumbled with her attendance sheet, unsure of how to proceed, while the man who had just entered, the one with the satchel and the loosened tie, stood with his eyes fixed on the board. "Who worked this out?" he asked again, this time more directly. The silence stretched. A couple of students shifted in their seats, some grinning as if waiting for a show. Finally, a boy in the back called out. It was Carter. "She thinks she's smart enough for honors." The word honors dripped with mockery. She lifted her chin just enough to meet his eyes. They weren't cold like Hawthorne's, or dismissive like so many others. They were sharp, evaluating, but not cruel. The words weren't loud. They didn't ring out like a trophy announcement. But for Aaliyah, they landed heavier than any applause. The substitute cleared her throat, clearly unsettled by the disruption. "Mr. Rodriguez, I assume?" He nodded. "Yes. Sorry for barging in. I left materials for my next period." His eyes flicked back to Aaliyah. Did she really solve this without notes? A few students laughed, eager to minimize her. "She's always trying too hard." Rodriguez ignored them. He gathered the stack of test papers he'd come for, then paused. "Leave the problem on the board," he told the substitute. "I'd like to reference it." The bell rang. and students spilled out into the hallway. Aaliyah packed her things slowly, feeling eyes on her. She heard snippets show off teacher's pet already, but she tuned them out. As she left, Rodriguez caught her at the doorway. His voice dropped low enough for only her to hear. Don't erase that fire. They'll try, but don't let them. Her breath caught. No teacher had ever spoken to her like that. Not with recognition. Not with warning. Later that week, she saw him again. Rodriguez was a long-term substitute, filling in for a teacher on leave. His presence unsettled some of the staff, mostly because he wasn't as pliable as others. He let students speak freely, asked questions that didn't come from the textbook, and most strikingly, he listened. When he called on Aaliyah in class, he didn't dismiss her answers. He pressed her further, forcing her to expand, to defend, to sharpen. At first she thought he was trying to expose her, but she soon realized he was drawing her out, like someone polishing stone, until the cut of the diamond showed. One afternoon after class, when the others had filed out, he gestured for her to stay. You remind me of someone I taught years ago, he said, stacking his papers neatly. Bright, quick, saw more than what was written. She fought her way into the Ivy League, but the hardest part wasn't the coursework. What was it? Aaliyah asked. The gatekeepers, he said simply. He leaned back against the desk, folding his arms.
You'll find out soon enough.
Talent doesn't threaten the system. Visibility does. They'll protect their favorites, the ones who fit the image they want to showcase. And the rest, he shook his head. They'll call it not a good fit, or not recommended. So what do I do? She asked. Rodriguez looked at her for a long moment. You keep working anyway. Not for their recognition, for your own truth. That night, Aaliyah sat at her desk at home, replaying his words. Her mother was humming in the kitchen, Marcus thundering around with his toy basketball. The sound of family filled the apartment, but inside her chest was a new rhythm, a pulse of possibility. Someone inside the walls of that school had finally seen her. She didn't know that Rodriguez had carried her test paper home with him that day. He had circled her solutions, double-checked her reasoning, and found it flawless. He sat at his kitchen table, his daughter's toys scattered across the floor, and stared at Aaliyah's handwriting as if it were a message meant for him alone. The following week, when the state sent out its open call for a student math and science competition, Rodriguez hesitated. The rules required a teacher sponsor. Normally he wouldn't bypass protocol, but when he read the line, students may be nominated at the discretion of faculty, he thought of her chalk-streaked hands, her quiet fire, and the way the classroom had gone still when she solved that problem. He filled out the form, where it asked for the student's knowledge of the nomination. He checked the box, not informed. 2 days later, Aaliyah walked into class to find Rodriguez already at the board, sketching a diagram of intersecting triangles. He glanced at her briefly, and for the faintest moment, his expression carried something she couldn't name, anticipation maybe, or resolve. She sat down, unaware that in a locked drawer of his desk, an envelope already bore her name, stamped and addressed to the state competition committee. She thought the first spark of recognition had already happened. She didn't know that it was only beginning. As Aaliyah packed her bag, Rodriguez slipped the sealed envelope into the outgoing mail bin, her name printed clearly on the front, though she had no idea her future had just been set in motion. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday, slipped beneath the stack of utility bills and grocery store flyers. Her name was printed in bold, across the front, Miss Aaliyah Carter. The return address read, State Academic Council, Office of Student Excellence. Her fingers trembled. She peeled it open carefully, as if the paper inside might disintegrate if she rushed. The letter was brief, but the words carved themselves into her mind. Congratulations. You have been selected as a finalist in the State Math and Science Invitational. Your nomination was reviewed and approved by faculty submission. She pressed the letter to her chest and let herself imagine it. The stage, the judges, the chance to prove herself not just to one school, but to an entire state. But as quickly as the joy bloomed, fear swept in behind it. Her eyes snagged on a line at the bottom. Please confirm with your principal's office within 10 days. The next morning at school, she walked the halls with the letter folded inside her notebook. She wanted to show Rodriguez, to whisper her gratitude for something she now suspected he had done. But every time she caught his eye, she hesitated. What if it embarrassed him? What if somehow she was wrong? By third period, she couldn't hold it in any longer. When the bell rang and the classroom cleared, she lingered. Rodriguez looked up from his desk, surprised to see her still standing there. Something on your mind? he asked. You deserve this, he said quietly. But prepare yourself. Not everyone will want to see you there. Her throat tightened. You think he'll try to stop me? When Hawthorne finally waved her in, he barely looked up from his papers. What is it, Miss Carter? She placed the letter on his desk. I was selected as a finalist for the state invitational. It says I need confirmation from your office. He read it slowly, his jaw tightening. Then he set it down, folding his hands. Yes, about that. He leaned back in his chair, his voice smooth but cutting. There's been a clerical mistake. These competitions rely on accurate faculty recommendations, and unfortunately your application must have slipped through the cracks. Her pulse quickened. But it says I was approved. He interrupted, his tone sharper. Not by me. And as principal, I am the final authority on eligibility. Without my confirmation, you cannot participate. Hawthorne leaned forward, lowering his voice. This isn't personal, Miss Carter. These programs are highly competitive. They're not meant for every student. You'd be setting yourself up for embarrassment. The paper crumpled slightly under her tightening grip. She forced herself to meet his eyes. I want to try. His smile was thin, humorless. Ambition is admirable. But I'll take care of this. That evening, at the dinner table, Danielle noticed her daughter's silence. Marcus chattered about a video game tournament, waving his fork like a microphone, but Aaliyah barely touched her food. Finally, Danielle asked, What's wrong, baby girl? Aaliyah hesitated, then slid the letter across the table. Danielle read it once, then again, her brows lifting higher with each line. Finalist? Aaliyah, this is… She stopped, her smile fading, as she saw the look in her daughter's eyes. What happened? Aaliyah's voice cracked. He said it was a mistake, that he won't confirm it. The room went still. Marcus's fork clattered onto his plate. Danielle set the letter down carefully, but her jaw was tight, her hands shaking. He said that? Aaliyah nodded. Danielle leaned back in her chair, silent for a moment. Then she stood, her decision carved in her stride. Then I'll take care of it. The next morning, the air in the school office shifted before Danielle even spoke. She walked in with the letter clutched in her hand, her hospital uniform still creased from the night shift. The secretary rose nervously as Danielle demanded to see the principal. Hawthorne emerged, adjusting his tie as though preparing for a performance. Mrs. Carter, he began smoothly. If this is about that invitational, I can assure you. Danielle cut him off, her voice low but unyielding. You assured my daughter she didn't belong in honors. Now you're telling her she doesn't deserve a chance she earned. You don't get to make both decisions. Hawthorne's face flushed, but he kept his composure. Mrs. Carter, you don't understand the procedures. I understand enough, Danielle snapped. She slammed the letter down on his desk, the sound echoing in the small office. This is her name. This is her achievement. And you will not erase it. The secretary froze, glancing between them. Hawthorne's jaw clenched. For the first time his veneer of control slipped, just slightly. And in that moment, Aaliyah, watching from the doorway, realized something she had never seen before. For once he wasn't dismissing. He was cornered. Hawthorne opened his mouth to respond, but the office door swung wider. Another figure stepping inside with a folder in hand, and what they carried had the power to decide whether Aaliyah's chance at the stage would live or die. The office was thick with tension. Danielle's words still hung in the air, sharp as glass. You will not erase it. Hawthorne sat stiffly, hands folded over his desk, his eyes darting toward the secretary who looked as if she wanted to sink into her chair. Then the door opened wider. A man in a navy blazer stepped inside holding a folder marked District Review Committee. His nameplate badge read, Mr. Peters. He glanced from Danielle to Hawthorne, then down at the letter Danielle had slammed on the desk. Is this about the state invitational? Peters asked, his tone dry but curious. Hawthorne's jaw tightened. It's being handled. There was a clerical misstep. Peters raised a brow. The district's office received a call from the council this morning. They were confused about why one of their confirmed finalists hadn't yet been cleared by the school. The silence that followed was heavy. Danielle's lips curved into something between relief and fury. She crossed her arms. Exactly my point. He's blocking her. Embarrassment for who? Danielle snapped. Her or you. The secretary's pen slipped from her hand. The office door was still half open, and voices carried easily into the hallway where a few students lingered, peeking in with wide eyes. A teacher walking by slowed down, sensing the friction. For once, Hawthorne seemed to realize the walls weren't protecting him. Within days, the confrontation had leaked beyond the office. Parents whispered in the pickup line, teachers traded looks in the lounge, and students hungry for gossip passed around versions of the story that painted Hawthorne as either a gatekeeper or a misunderstood authority, depending on who was telling it. But what no one could ignore was this. Aaliyah Carter's name had been announced in the school's daily bulletin as a state finalist. Danielle had made sure of it. She had marched to the district office the morning after her confrontation, letter in hand, and refused to leave until someone signed off. Peters had backed her, and the council had confirmed Aaliyah's spot. Still, victory didn't taste sweet. Aaliyah walked the halls with her head high, but inside she felt the shift. Whispers sharpened when she passed. Some classmates muttered that she'd only gotten through because her mother had made a scene. Others insisted Rodriguez had pulled strings, that she hadn't earned it. In the cafeteria, she overheard a girl at another table whisper, "It's just charity, like letting someone play for practice." The words made her fork slip against her tray with a screech. She forced herself not to react, not to give them the satisfaction. On Friday, Hawthorne called her back into his office. He gestured for her to sit but didn't soften his tone. "Miss Carter," he said, steepling his fingers, "you'll attend this competition, but understand, one mistake, one slip, and you'll confirm exactly what some of us have been saying, that you weren't ready, that you don't belong there." She met his gaze, steady. "Then I won't make a mistake." His thin smile revealed nothing, but the warning lingered like smoke. The day of the competition arrived with a cold wind rattling the school bus windows. Danielle and Marcus rode with her to the state university where the event was held, a sprawling campus of glass buildings and banners that read "Inspiring Tomorrow's Leaders." As they entered the auditorium, Aaliyah's nerves tangled with awe. Dozens of students filled the space, some accompanied by parents in tailored suits, others surrounded by school officials who fussed over them like prized athletes. Tables were arranged in rows, each marked with name cards. When Aaliyah found hers, she froze. Ethan glanced at her card, then at her, a smirk tugging at his mouth. "Carter, huh? Haven't seen that name in the honor circuit." The moderator stepped to the microphone, welcoming everyone and outlining the rules. But Aaliyah barely heard. Her heart pounded, her palms damp against the pencil she clutched. She thought of Hawthorne's warning, of the whispers at school, of the ugly note she had crumpled weeks ago. Every voice that had told her she didn't belong pressed in around her like walls. Then she remembered something else. Rodriguez's quiet words, "Don't erase that fire." She straightened in her chair, shoulders back, chin steady. If they wanted her to shrink, she would expand instead. The competition began. Questions flashed across the projector screen. Complex problems in algebra, geometry, physics. Students scribbled furiously. The room a symphony of pencils scratching. At first, Aaliyah worked methodically, double-checking each step. But as the rounds continued, something shifted. The problems didn't intimidate her. They sparked her. The logic unfolded in her mind like music, steady and clear. The tension in the room rose as scores were tallied after each round. Aaliyah's name climbed the board steadily. 5th, then 4th, then 3rd. By the final round, she was in 2nd place, trailing only Ethan. The moderator announced the last question, one designed to break even the strongest competitors. A hush fell. Aaliyah gripped her pencil. She could feel every eye in the auditorium watching, waiting. The pencil hovered between her fingers. Ethan's whisper still clung to her ear like a thorn. "One wrong answer, and they'll all say you were never supposed to be here." For a moment, Aaliyah's chest tightened, panic threatening to overtake her focus. The auditorium's silence pressed down, suffocating, broken only by the furious scratching of pencils on paper. Charlotte scribbled quickly. Ethan leaned back with false confidence, and the judges at the front leaned forward as if they could already sense who would rise and who would crumble. She closed her eyes, just for a breath, blocking out the noise, the whispers, the weight of Hawthorne's warning. In the stillness, she heard her mother's voice. "You don't let anyone write your story for you, Aaliyah. Not them, not ever." Her pencil touched the page. The question was merciless. A system of equations disguised inside a geometry proof. A trick meant to push students into collapsing under the strain. But to Aaliyah, the pieces began to arrange themselves. The noise faded. She saw angles not as lines on paper but as moving shapes in her mind, folding into one another like origami. She wrote carefully, each step neat, refusing to give doubt a foothold. Halfway through, her pulse spiked. She had hit a dead end. For a terrifying second, she thought Ethan was right. But then she caught it. A single hidden ratio in the problem. Subtle but precise. She corrected her path and pressed forward. When she set her pencil down, her page was complete. Not only correct but clear. Every step visible. She was the first to finish. A ripple moved through the judge's table. One leaned over to another, nodding. The timer buzzed. Students' pencils dropped reluctantly. "Papers up," the moderator called. As the proctors collected the sheets, Ethan glanced sideways at her page. His smirk faltered. He had left his last line unfinished. The waiting was the hardest part. Contestants fidgeted in their seats as judges tallied results. Danielle squeezed Marcus's hand in the audience, her eyes never leaving her daughter. Finally, the moderator returned to the podium, microphone crackling. In third place, Charlotte Kessler, representing Westbrook Academy. Polite applause filled the room. Charlotte smiled thinly, her eyes darting toward Aaliyah with something colder than disappointment. In second place, Ethan Whitmore, representing Jefferson Preparatory. The audience gasped. Ethan was the favorite, the senator's son. He stiffened, his face flushing, his parents shifting uncomfortably in the front row. And in first place, with a perfect solution on the final round, Aaliyah Carter, representing Eastview High School. For a moment she didn't move. Her body froze, as though her mind refused to accept the words. Then Danielle shot to her feet, clapping wildly, tears streaming down her face. Marcus leapt up beside her, shouting, "That's my sister." The applause swelled. Some faces looked shocked, others skeptical, but the sound was undeniable. Aaliyah rose slowly, her hands trembling, and walked to stage. The moderator handed her a medal, heavy and gleaming against her chest. Cameras flashed. She looked out into the crowd and saw her mother's face, pride burning brighter than the stage lights. For the first time, Aaliyah felt visible not as an exception, but as proof. Reporters crowded her afterward. Microphones extended. Questions fired rapidly. "How does it feel to be the first student from Eastview to win in years? Did you expect to beat competitors from elite schools?" Her voice wavered at first, but she steadied it. "I've always loved solving problems. It's not about where you come from, it's about what you can do if you don't give up." Cameras clicked. A journalist scribbled her name furiously. Another asked, "We've heard Eastview hasn't nominated many students in the past. Do you feel supported by your school?" The question caught her off guard. For a flicker of a second she remembered Hawthorne's dismissal. His muttered words, "They always think they're exceptions." She hesitated. "My teachers have encouraged me," she said carefully, glancing toward Rodriguez in the back row. "But I think sometimes students like me have to push harder to be seen." The answer landed. A few reporters exchanged knowing looks, already piecing together a narrative larger than her medal. By the next morning her name was everywhere. The local paper ran a headline, "Eastview Student Defies Odds, Wins State Invitational." A regional news station aired a segment with clips of her solving at the board, the anchor calling her a quiet genius from the city's most overlooked school. But the article that shook Eastview the most came from an education blog that had picked up her story. Why did Eastview try to hide its brightest student? It detailed how the school had no record of honors recommendations for Aaliyah, hinting at bias in the system. Parents began sharing the link. Students whispered about it in hallways. Teachers looked uneasy. And Principal Hawthorne seethed. That night his office light glowed long after the building emptied. The paper lay open on his desk. Aaliyah's face printed beside headlines that implied failure, not hers but his. He picked up the phone, his voice clipped when the other line answered. "Yes, it's Hawthorne," he said. "We need to talk about Carter. The media is circling. I'll handle the situation, but I'll need the board's backing. She cannot be allowed to dictate the school's reputation." He paused, his fingers drumming against the desk. "Yes, consider it handled." As he hung up, Hawthorne looked at the photograph of Aaliyah in the paper, her smile bright metal gleaming, and muttered under his breath, "Enjoy it while it lasts." The Monday after her victory, Aaliyah expected the school to feel different. She walked through the double doors with her medal tucked inside her backpack, the weight of it grounding her. She imagined that maybe, just maybe, the walls that once ignored her would finally recognize her. But Eastview High had its own rhythm, and it didn't bend easily. The first sign came in the hallway, where two girls glanced at her and whispered loud enough for her to hear. She didn't really win. Somebody must have given her the answers. Probably that new teacher. Rodriguez, right? Aaliyah kept her eyes forward, shoulders tight. In first period, Miss Pritchard collected essays. Aaliyah's paper, 10 pages of meticulous analysis. Her strongest work yet, was returned the next day with a glaring red C scrawled across the top. The comments weren't about her arguments but about tone and structure. Vague critiques that erased the hours she'd spent. Meanwhile, a classmate's paper, thin and riddled with errors, had earned a glowing A. Aaliyah flipped through her essay again, reading each margin note. None pointed to real mistakes. None acknowledged the depth of her work. The silence in her chest thickened. At lunch, she overheard a group of boys from her math class. "You see the article?" said Eastview tried to hide her. "Nah," she hid behind somebody else. "No way she beat Whitmore fair." Another chimed in. "Bet the judges felt sorry for her. You know, optics." The words slammed into her harder than the laughter that followed. Even the teachers, the ones who had once been neutral, began to shift. In Mr. Crawley's history class, she raised her hand to answer a question about Reconstruction amendments. He glanced past her, calling instead on another student who gave a half-correct response. Rodriguez noticed. He lingered in doorways between classes, offering her brief nods of encouragement. But Aaliyah sensed his caution too. He wasn't in a position of permanent authority, and pushing too hard could cost him his job. She was on her own inside the classrooms. At home, Danielle tried to keep spirits high. She taped the newspaper clipping of Aaliyah's victory to the refrigerator, right next to Marcus's spelling tests. "This house celebrates wins," she said firmly, even as her eyes betrayed her worry. But Marcus noticed the shift too. "Why's everyone acting weird at school?" he asked one evening. "Shouldn't they be proud of you?" Aaliyah forced a smile. Not everyone likes when the story doesn't go the way they expect. By the second week, the sabotage became sharper. In math, she turned in a problem set with every answer checked and rechecked. It came back marked incomplete. Pages had been lost, according to the teacher. In science, she was assigned twice the number of lab reports as her peers, told it was to challenge her. Even the principal made his presence felt. During morning announcements, Hawthorne congratulated the basketball team for a weekend win, mentioned a debate club placing in regionals, but made no mention of Aaliyah's state victory. When a teacher tried to bring it up in the faculty lounge, Hawthorne reportedly shut it down with a single line: "We don't want to create unrealistic expectations." The students followed the lead. Some accused her outright. "You cheated. Bet your mom pulled strings. Rodriguez probably fed you the test." Each accusation was a sting, but worse was the silence from those who knew her best. Even friends like Brianna hesitated, unsure whether defending her would drag them into the storm. Aaliyah withdrew, her smile rare, her shoulders carrying a constant weight. At night, she stared at the medal on her desk. It gleamed, but instead of pride, it now radiated pressure. Was she just proving Hawthorne right? Struggling to hold a place she wasn't meant to keep? One afternoon, Rodriguez caught her after class. "They're tightening around you," he said quietly. "I know." He hesitated, lowering his voice further. "This isn't just about you, it's about the school's image. You winning makes them answer for years of students like you. They've ignored. They'll fight to protect that system." Her chest ached. "So what do I do?" Rodriguez met her eyes. "You keep doing the work. You make it undeniable." But the system wasn't done yet. It happened on a Thursday evening. Danielle came home from her shift, the mail tucked under her arm. She sifted through envelopes absent-mindedly until one caught her eye, plain white, no return address. It was addressed to the Carter family. She tore it open at the kitchen counter. Her face went pale. The letter inside was typed unsigned. "The recent award granted to your daughter is under review. Multiple sources have raised concerns of plagiarism and external assistance. If these allegations are verified, her title will be revoked, and disciplinary action will follow." Danielle's hands shook as she read it again. The words blurred. She dropped into a chair, clutching the letter, her breath unsteady. Aaliyah entered the kitchen moments later, still in her school clothes, hair slightly frizzed from the damp weather. "Mom? What's wrong?" Danielle didn't answer immediately. She handed her the letter. Aaliyah read it once, then twice. Her stomach flipped. She looked up at her mother, eyes wide with a mix of fear and disbelief. "They're saying I didn't earn it," she whispered. But even as she said it, the fear lingered in both their eyes. Aaliyah gripped the letter, her heart racing. Someone had accused her of plagiarism, and if they succeeded, everything she had fought for could be erased in an instant. The letter lay flat on the kitchen table, but its shadow stretched across the whole apartment. Every time Aaliyah glanced at it, she felt the words tightening around her throat. Plagiarism. External assistance. Revoked. That night, she barely touched her dinner. Marcus tried to distract her with a story about his friend's disastrous science project, but his voice was just static in her ears. Danielle insisted everything would be handled, but even she spoke with a kind of fire that was born of fear. In her room, Aaliyah sat at her desk with her notebook stacked in uneven towers. She opened one, tracing her handwriting, the numbers, the essays, the scrawled reminders to herself. These were her fingerprints, proof of her mind, but the letter made her wonder. Was it enough? Could anyone else even see what she saw? Or would they all decide she had stolen what she had built? The next morning at school, whispers hit her before she even reached her locker. She copied. She had help. I heard the judges are reviewing her work. A boy from her math class leaned against the lockers and said loudly, "Guess we'll see how long that medal lasts." His smirk made her stomach knot. She wanted to shout, to tell them she had solved every problem on her own, that she had stayed up nights scribbling until her hands cramped. But the words caught in her throat. The louder their accusations became, the smaller she felt. Even teachers seemed to watch her differently now. Miss Pritchard, once merely dismissive, called on her less and less. Mr. Crowley returned another quiz with a grade that made no sense. His explanation vague. It wasn't just students spreading doubt anymore. The adults were silently reinforcing it. By the end of the week, the weight was unbearable. On Friday night, Danielle came home from her shift to find the apartment too quiet. Marcus was at a friend's, the TV off. She walked down the hall and stopped cold. Aaliyah's room looked like a storm had ripped through it. Pages littered the floor, notebooks torn apart, pencil shavings scattered across the rug. Aaliyah sat in the middle of it all, clutching a ripped-out page in her hands. Her cheeks were wet, her breathing sharp. Danielle dropped her bag and rushed forward. "Baby girl, what are you doing?" Danielle grabbed her wrists gently, stopping her. "No. Don't you dare say that." Tears spilled harder down Aaliyah's face. "Mom, they think I cheated. Even the teachers look at me like I'm lying. What if I am just fooling myself?" Danielle's throat tightened. She pulled her daughter close, wrapping her arms around her as if she could shield her from every word spoken against her. "Listen to me," Danielle said firmly, her voice breaking with conviction. "You come from people who survived worse than whispers. Our ancestors built futures out of nothing. They worked fields, cleaned houses, carried weights so heavy you can't imagine, and still they prayed and dreamed, so that you could be here. Do you hear me? You are not their mistake. You are their answered prayer." Aaliyah pressed her face into her mother's shoulder. Trembling, Danielle rocked her gently, whispering over and over, "You belong. You belong." Later that night, long after Aaliyah had finally fallen asleep, Danielle sat at the kitchen table, with her head in her hands. She read the letter again, fury twisting inside her. She thought of marching to the school and demanding answers, but exhaustion pinned her down. All she could do was prepare to fight for her daughter, with every ounce she had left. By Monday morning, Aaliyah tried to gather herself. She brushed her hair neatly, packed her backpack carefully, and told herself she would not let them break her. Danielle kissed her forehead before she left. "Head high, baby girl. Remember who you are." But the moment she arrived at school, something felt off. Students were clustered in groups, buzzing with a different kind of energy. When she walked into homeroom, silence rippled through the room. The announcement came over the intercom just before first period. The principal's voice was calm, measured, almost smug. "Attention students. It has come to the administration's attention that serious concerns have been raised regarding academic dishonesty by one of our own. Effective immediately, student Aaliyah Carter is suspended from all school activities, pending investigation." The words landed like a hammer. Gasps filled the room. Some students glanced at her. Others smirked. A few avoided her eyes. The intercom clicked off. Her teacher cleared her throat awkwardly. "Miss Carter, please gather your belongings and report to the office." As Aaliyah rose, hands trembling, she saw Hawthorne waiting outside the door. His arms crossed, his expression cold satisfaction, as if this suspension was the final move in a game he had been playing all along. Aaliyah stood in the hallway, her backpack heavy against her shoulder straps, her palms slick with sweat. The word suspended echoed through her ears like a verdict. Students stared as she walked toward the office, Hawthorne's shadow filling the doorway like a barrier she couldn't cross without giving something up. By the time Danielle arrived at the school, she found her daughter sitting stiffly in the waiting area, eyes red but dry, her suspension slip folded into a square between her fingers. Danielle read it once, then again, and her chest swelled with a rage that threatened to burst. "You think you can break her with paper," she said when Hawthorne appeared. Her voice was low, but it carried. The secretary froze, the phone receiver slipping slightly in her grip. "This is procedure, Mrs. Carter," Hawthorne replied smoothly. "Until we verify the integrity of her work, she cannot represent this school. Our reputation is at stake." Danielle stepped closer. "Our reputation? Or yours?" The office went silent. That evening, Danielle didn't cry quietly in her room as before. Instead, she picked up the phone. First, she called her sister, then a neighbor, then a friend from church. By morning, the story was already moving, passed through phone calls, whispered at barbershops, murmured in pews. "She won for all of us," one parent said. "And now they're trying to erase her," another answered. By Wednesday night, a meeting had been called at Mount Zion Baptist, the church that had stood for decades as the community's gathering place in times of celebration and crisis. The sanctuary buzzed with voices, the wooden pews filled with parents, grandparents, neighbors, and children. Danielle sat with Aaliyah and Marcus in the front row, her hands clasped tightly, while Pastor Williams stepped to the pulpit. He was an older man with a slow, deliberate way of speaking, each word chosen like a brick in a foundation. He held up a clipping of the newspaper article about Aaliyah's win. "This young sister," he began, his voice carrying through the church, "brought pride to this entire community. She stood on that stage, not just for herself, but for every student who has been told they don't belong. And now, they are trying to drag her down." The crowd murmured, heads shaking. "This is not new," Williams continued. "How many children have been denied? How many doors closed quietly without a fight? But now we have a face, a name, a story, and we will not be silent." Applause rippled through the sanctuary. Aaliyah sat still, overwhelmed by the weight of so many eyes on her. She wasn't used to being at the center of attention, and part of her wanted to shrink. But then she saw her mother's hand resting firmly over hers, grounding her. Rodriguez was there too, standing near the back. When the meeting ended, he approached Danielle. "They'll dig in harder now," he warned quietly. "The district protects itself." "Then let them dig," Danielle said, her jaw set. "We'll be louder." "Mrs. Carter, is it true your daughter was suspended after accusations of plagiarism?"
Yes, Danielle said firmly.
"And do you believe it's connected to the principal denying her access to the honors program earlier this year?" Danielle hesitated, then looked directly into the camera. "I don't just believe it. I know it. They've been trying to keep her small since day one." The clip aired that night on the evening news. By the next morning, Aaliyah's name was spreading on social media. Hashtags appeared. "To stand with Aaliyah," and "Another shine." Not everyone supported her. Some parents at Eastview argued in online comment threads that the school was right to investigate. Others insisted she had only won because of politics. Suddenly, Aaliyah's story was no longer just hers. It was part of a much larger conversation. Inside the school, tension mounted. Teachers whispered in the lounge. Some avoided Aaliyah altogether. Others, quietly supportive, slipped her encouraging notes or reminded her to hold on. Rodriguez stayed careful. He didn't speak to the press, but his silence was telling. Students noticed the way his eyes flicked toward Hawthorne whenever her name was mentioned. He had fought to keep that report buried. If it surfaced now, tied to Aaliyah's case, it wouldn't just be her reputation on the line. It would be his career. His phone buzzed. A message from a board member blinked on the screen. "Media's circling. Control the narrative before someone leaks the report." Hawthorne closed the folder slowly, his face pale. At that very moment, Rodriguez, alone in his classroom, unlocked a drawer and slid out a copy of the same report. He stared at it, knowing it could either save Aaliyah or destroy everything if released. Rodriguez sat in his empty classroom long after the last bell had rung. The halls outside were quiet, save for the distant clatter of a janitor's cart. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the thick folder on his desk. The Equity and Access report. He had found it months earlier in the district's shared archives. buried under mislabeled files. Something about the way it had been tucked away made him keep a copy for himself. Now staring at Aaliyah's face on the front page of the morning paper, framed by headlines of controversy, he knew this report had stopped being just a file. He tapped the cover with his fingertips. Inside was years of evidence. Cold numbers, stark charts, damning language. Students like Aaliyah consistently denied entry into advanced programs. Despite test scores, despite teacher recommendation, the names and faces had changed, but the pattern remained. The report wasn't just data, it was proof. And it was the one thing Hawthorne couldn't spin. 2 nights later, Rodriguez knocked on the Carters' apartment door. Danielle answered, still in her hospital scrubs, her face lined with exhaustion. She blinked in surprise when she saw him standing there. "Mr. Rodriguez?" she asked, lowering her voice out of instinct, as if his presence alone was risky. "I need to show you something," he said. His tone was measured, urgent but not reckless. Rodriguez placed the folder on the table, sliding it across to Danielle. "This is from the district. I shouldn't have it, but you need to." Danielle hesitated before opening it. She pulled out the first page and scanned the introduction, her eyes narrowing. The language was bureaucratic, but the meaning was clear. Disparities, oversight, patterns of disproportionality. As she flipped through, she found page after page of charts. Out of hundreds of students placed in honors and advanced courses over the past decade, fewer than 10 were black. In several years, the number was 0. Notes in the margins revealed how administrators justified the imbalance. Concerns about fit, parental support may be limited, risk of underperformance. Danielle's hand shook as she turned the pages. My God. Aaliyah leaned closer, her heart pounding. "So it's not just me?" Rodriguez met her gaze. "It was never just you." Danielle pressed her palm flat against the paper, as if to steady it. "If this is true, then every child who was pushed out, every dream that was cut off." Her voice trailed off, fury choking her. Aaliyah whispered, "They've been doing this on purpose." Rodriguez nodded grimly. The district hoped no one would ever notice. Hawthorne isn't the only one, but he's the name most tied to it now. He's been principal for nearly 15 years. Danielle closed the folder slowly. "If we show this, they'll come after us harder." Rodriguez didn't argue. "Yes, they will, but this is the truth." That night, the Carters sat in their living room, the folder between them like a live wire. Danielle paced the floor, chewing at her lip, while Marcus dozed off on the couch. Aaliyah sat with her arms wrapped around her knees, her eyes never leaving the folder. "If we release it," Danielle said, "they'll say we're stirring trouble. They'll call me an angry black woman trying to tear down the school. They'll say Aaliyah is only where she is because of sympathy." Aaliyah's voice cracked. "But if we don't, then what was the point of everything? They'll keep doing it. To the next kid, and the next." Danielle froze, her daughter's words landing heavier than anything in the report. She turned slowly, meeting Aaliyah's tearful eyes. "Baby girl," she whispered, "you shouldn't have to fight this battle." "But I already am," Aaliyah said. "They already made me." Silence filled the room. Danielle sank onto the couch beside her, pulling her into a hug. By morning, the decision had been made. Danielle called Jasmine Lee, the reporter who had first covered Aaliyah's story. They met at a small coffee shop on the corner of 5th and Maple, far from the school. Danielle slid the folder across the table. Jasmine's eyes widened as she flipped through the pages. "Do you know what this is?" she whispered. "Yes," Danielle said. "It's the truth." Jasmine leaned back, exhaling. "If this goes public, it'll be explosive. You're talking about decades of systemic discrimination. You're talking about taking down not just Hawthorne but the entire district leadership." Danielle didn't blink. "Then let it be explosive." 3 days later, the headline dropped. Leaked report reveals years of discrimination in Eastview School District. The article included charts from the report, testimonials from parents Jasmine had tracked down, and most damningly, a section that tied the disparities directly to leadership under Principal William Hawthorne. His name was printed in bold letters, linked to years of blocked recommendations, and coded language in district memos. The news spread like wildfire. Parents forwarded the article in group chats. Teachers whispered in the lounge. Community leaders demanded answers. In the Carter apartment, the phone rang non-stop. Reporters, activists, even parents they had never met, all calling to thank them or to ask for interviews. Aaliyah sat at the table, staring at the newspaper spread open in front of her. For the first time, it wasn't her name being dragged through the mud. It was his. At Eastview High, Hawthorne stormed into his office with the paper in hand. He slammed it down on his desk, his face red. The secretary avoided his eyes. "Who leaked this?" he demanded. No one answered. He picked up the phone, his hand trembling with rage. On the other end of the line, a board member's voice was cold. "The report is out, William. The community is furious. And unless you find a way to turn this around, you'll be the one they burn." The leaked report had detonated like a bomb. By Monday morning, the district was in crisis mode. The front steps of Eastview High were clogged with reporters holding microphones and cameras, their shouts echoing against the brick walls. Parents marched with signs, "Let her shine, end the bias, justice for our kid." But just as many arrived in defense of the school, holding posters that read, "Trust the principal and protect our reputation." Inside, Hawthorne prepared for war. His office door remained shut, blinds drawn, but the rumble of his phone calls carried through the thin walls. Staff passing by heard the repeated refrain, "I'm being targeted. I followed procedure. They're twisting this." By midweek, the school board had convened a closed-door emergency session. Hawthorne stood before them, the leaked report stacked on the table like evidence in a trial. He smoothed his tie, his voice calm, but laced with indignation. "This so-called report is nothing more than selective data taken out of context," he said. "My job has always been to protect students from environments they aren't prepared for. If anything, I've saved them from failure." Several board members nodded, eyes wary but sympathetic. "William," one said, "we've known you for years. You've served this district loyally. We understand how things can be misinterpreted." Another leaned forward. "What about the girl, Carter? Isn't this all centered around her?" Hawthorne's lips curved into a practiced frown. "Yes. A student with potential, no doubt. But potential does not equal readiness. She was elevated beyond her capacity by outsiders who wanted a story. Now her family is weaponizing her against this institution." While Hawthorne painted himself as the victim, the community fractured. On one side, parents of black and brown students crowded school meetings, demanding accountability. "Our kids are just as capable," one mother shouted, her voice breaking. "Stop shutting them out." On the other side, wealthier parents filled the boardroom with polished speeches. "Dr. Hawthorne is a man of integrity," one father declared. "He has kept our school's reputation intact for years. Don't tear him down because of political pressure." Through it all, Aaliyah sat in her room, drowning in the noise. Her face appeared on TV screens she never turned on, her name printed in headlines she couldn't bear to read. She wanted to disappear, to retreat into the quiet comfort of her notebooks. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw the medal on her desk, proof of what she'd earned, now being twisted into a weapon against her. At school, the tension was unbearable. Some students avoided her altogether. Others taunted her openly. One afternoon, as she walked down the hallway, someone had scrawled across her locker in red marker, "Fake." She froze, staring at the word. Her chest tightened, but she didn't cry. She simply wiped it off with her sleeve, each stroke an act of quiet defiance. Rodriguez caught her afterward, his expression pained. "They want you to break," he said softly. "I already feel broken," she whispered.
"No," he said firmly. "Broken means you stop. You're still standing."
Meanwhile, Hawthorne doubled down in public. At a school board press conference, he stood at the podium, his tone sharp and rehearsed.
"I am being unfairly targeted for doing my job.
"For years I've made decisions in the best interest of this school. Now because one student and her family want to paint themselves as victims, my integrity is under attack. Let me be clear. This is not about race. This is about standards." Applause erupted from a section of parents behind him, their cheers loud enough to drown out the boos from the other side. The cameras captured every moment. That night, the evening news ran the clip under the headline, "Principal stands firm amid accusations." For a terrifying stretch of days, it looked like he might survive. The board delayed judgment, citing further review. Teachers remained divided, unwilling to risk their own positions, and whispers spread that the district was preparing a statement, clearing him of wrongdoing. At the Carter apartment, Danielle slammed the newspaper down on the table. "He's turning it around," she said bitterly. "He's making you the villain, Aaliyah." Danielle reached across the table, gripping her daughter's hand. "The truth always finds its way, always. You just have to hold on." But the truth needed a push. It came unexpectedly, at the next board meeting. The room was packed, the air thick with tension. Hawthorne sat smugly at the front, his lawyer beside him. The board chair began reading a prepared statement, her voice steady. Then, from the back of the room, a woman stood. She was older, her hair streaked with gray, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched a folder. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some recognized her, Mrs. Latham, a retired teacher who had once taught at Eastview. "I can't stay silent anymore," she said, her voice shaking but clear. The room stilled. Hawthorne's eyes widened. Mrs. Latham stepped forward, each word carrying weight. "I taught here for 30 years. I watched black students excel in my classes, students who should have been in honors, students who begged for chances, and every time I recommended them, Principal Hawthorne shut the door." Gasps echoed through the room. Reporters scrambled for their recorders. "He told me once, they won't last in there. Better to save them from failing now." I stayed quiet then. I thought I couldn't fight the system. But watching what they're doing to this girl. She pointed toward Aaliyah, who sat frozen in the crowd. "Not anymore." The room erupted. Shouts, applause, outrage, while Hawthorne's face drained of color. For the first time, the fortress he had built around himself cracked. The school board chamber had never held so much electricity. Mrs. Latham's words hung in the air, like a lightning strike. For years, whispers had floated through the community, fragments of conversations about opportunities denied, recommendations that vanished, talent dismissed. But this was different. This was a teacher, one of their own, standing in the open, placing Principal William Hawthorne at the center of it all. The crowd surged with noise. Parents gasping, reporters shouting questions, supporters of Hawthorne shouting back. The board chair hammered her gavel against the wood, calling for order. But the damage had been done. The silence that had once protected Hawthorne had cracked wide open. Hawthorne's face flushed, his jaw stiffening as he tried to summon control. "This is outrageous," he barked, his voice cutting over the noise. "She is a retired teacher with an axe to grind. I've always acted in the best interest of this school." Mrs. Latham didn't flinch. Her voice, though trembling, carried the strength of someone who had held back too long. "I still have the memos. I saved them because I knew one day this truth would matter. Notes I wrote to him, recommendations he rejected. And I wasn't the only one. Others saw it. They were just too afraid to speak." The room went silent for a breath, as if the floor itself shifted beneath them. Danielle clutched Aaliyah's hand in the audience, tears brimming in her eyes. "They can't ignore it now," she whispered. Aaliyah's pulse thundered in her ears. Vindication flickered at the edges of her fear, but she couldn't quite believe it yet. After months of humiliation, whispers and accusations, could the truth really stand taller than the lies? The board called for a brief recess, retreating behind closed doors. The crowd buzzed with speculation. Reporters swarmed Mrs. Latham, their recorders shoved toward her trembling hands. Parents debated loudly in the aisles, their voices spilling into the hallway. Rodriguez slipped through the chaos and crouched beside Aaliyah. "Do you see what just happened?" he said, his tone urgent, but steady. "She gave them the truth. They can't bury this anymore." Aaliyah searched his face, her voice quiet. "But what if the board still sides with him?" Rodriguez shook his head. "Not with witnesses, not with documents, not with the community watching." When the board returned, the chair's face was pale, her voice measured. "After reviewing testimony and considering the evidence presented, the board has voted unanimously to place Principal William Hawthorne on immediate suspension, pending a full investigation." The room erupted, cheers, clapping, shouts of relief. Parents hugged one another, reporters bolted for the exits to file stories. Danielle covered her face with her hands, her body shaking with emotion. Beside her, Aaliyah sat frozen, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. The storm that had nearly drowned her suddenly shifted direction. She was no longer the accused. She was the proof of everything they had tried to deny. But Hawthorne wasn't done. He stood abruptly, slamming his hand on the table. "This is a disgrace," he shouted. "I have given my life to this institution. You're destroying me over one girl who got lucky." Gasps filled the chamber. His words revealed what he had hidden for months, that this was never about procedure, or standards, or fairness. It was about a deep, unspoken belief that certain students were never meant to succeed. The board chair's voice cut through his outburst. "Mr. Hawthorne, please leave the room. You are no longer in authority here." For the first time, Hawthorne looked small, his authority slipping from him like sand. He grabbed his briefcase and stormed out, flashes from cameras exploding as he pushed past reporters. The atmosphere shifted again, this time from outrage to celebration. Parents clapped Aaliyah on the shoulder as they passed. Strangers approached Danielle, thanking her for her courage. Marcus bounced excitedly at his sister's side, repeating, "They finally see you. They finally see you." And the board chair cleared her throat, raising her hand for quiet. "Before we close tonight's session," she said, "there is one voice we have not yet heard. Miss Carter, would you be willing to say a few words?" Every head turned toward Aaliyah. Her stomach dropped. Public speaking was not what she wanted. For weeks she had been fighting to simply be believed. Now the crowd expected her to be more than a survivor. They wanted her to be a voice. Danielle squeezed her hand. "This is your moment, baby girl. Say what's in your heart." With trembling legs, Aaliyah rose and walked slowly to the front. She felt the eyes of the room pressing down on her, the same weight she had felt under the stage lights at the competition, but heavier, because this time it wasn't about equations. It was about truth. She took a breath and began. "I never asked to be the center of this," she said, her voice soft at first. "All I wanted was a chance. A chance to learn, to prove myself, to be judged for my work, not for what I look like. But at every step someone told me I wasn't enough. They didn't just close doors. They locked them and threw away the key." The room was silent, the kind of silence that means every ear is listening. "I worked harder because I had to. But even when I won, they tried to take it away. They said I didn't earn it, that someone else must have given it to me. And I believed them for a while. I almost gave up." Her voice cracked, tears welling. "But I didn't. And I won't. Because I know now, it was never about me being good enough. It was about them not wanting to see me." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. "But here I am," she finished, standing taller. "And I'm not invisible anymore." Applause thundered through the chamber. Parents stood clapping, shouting her name. Danielle wept openly. Even board members nodded, some with shame, some with admiration. But just as the applause reached its peak, Aaliyah raised her hand for quiet. Her next words were not what anyone expected. "I need you all to understand something," she said, her voice steady now. "This isn't just about me. It's about every student who never got the chance I fought for. Every kid who was told not a good fit or not ready, and believed it. This medal, this victory, this moment, none of it will matter if I'm the only one it changes." The room stilled again, her words sinking in deeper than any headline. She wasn't just claiming her vindication, she was demanding transformation. A hush fell across the chamber, and then, unexpectedly, the governor's education advisor rose from the back row and stepped forward. "Miss Carter," she said into the microphone, "on behalf of the state, we'd like to offer you something." The applause still echoed in the board chamber when the woman from the governor's office stepped forward. Her presence had gone unnoticed until now, just another official in a dark blazer sitting quietly at the back. But the room hushed when she took the microphone, her voice clear and deliberate. "Miss Carter," she said, looking directly at Aaliyah, "on behalf of the Governor's Education Council, we'd like to recognize you, not simply for winning a competition, but for holding your ground when the world tried to tell you no." Gasps rippled through the audience. Reporters scribbled furiously. Danielle clutched Marcus's hand, her face trembling with pride, but Aaliyah didn't smile. Her throat tightened. The moment felt bigger than her, so much bigger, that it frightened her. For weeks she had been forced to defend her own name. Now she was being asked to represent something greater. She stepped closer to the microphone, her palms sweaty, her voice unsteady at first. "Thank you," she began. Then she paused, glancing around the packed room, at the parents, the teachers, the cameras. "But I can't accept this recognition as if it's just mine." The room shifted, a quiet ripple of surprise. Aaliyah drew a deep breath, steadying herself. "Because this moment isn't just about me. It's about every student who was told they weren't good enough. Every kid who sat in a classroom with all the answers but never got called on. Every child who was told not a good fit until they stopped believing in themselves." A murmur moved through the audience. People leaned forward, hanging on her words. "I know what it feels like," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "To walk into an office with your dreams in your hands and have them dismissed like they don't matter. To sit in classrooms where your best work is ignored, where you are invisible. I know what it feels like to hear whispers that you cheated, that you don't belong, when all you've done is work harder than anyone else in the room." Her voice cracked then, And she paused, swallowing down the tears, threatening to spill. But I also know what it feels like to keep going. To keep writing, keep solving, keep showing up even when they want you gone. And that fight, it isn't mine alone. It belongs to every student who has ever been silenced, rejected, or overlooked. The audience erupted in applause, but Aaliyah lifted her hand gently, quieting them again. I want this medal, she said, her hand brushing the ribbon around her neck, to mean more than a victory. I want it to be a promise that we will stop letting brilliance be hidden just because it doesn't come wrapped in privilege. Tears rolled down Danielle's cheeks. Pastor Williams, seated in the third row, bowed his head, his hands clasped tight. Even some of the board members who had once defended Hawthorne now sat visibly shaken, their faces lined with shame. Aaliyah's voice softened. So tonight, I'm not just speaking for myself. I'm speaking for the names you'll never know, the ones who never got the chance to stand on this stage. This win is for them, and I will not stop until the doors that were locked for me are opened for every student who comes after me. The room rose to its feet in thunderous applause. Parents wiped their eyes. Reporters shouted her name. For the first time, the story was no longer framed as a scandal. It was a movement. Within hours, clips of her speech spread across social media. Local news stations ran segments titled, "From Target to Trailblazer, Eastview Student Speaks Out." Online, hashtags like "Don Aaliyah's Voice" and "Sign" trended, amplifying her words far beyond her city. Jasmine Lee, the journalist who had followed her case, published an editorial that went viral overnight. She wasn't supposed to win. That's exactly why she had to. The narrative had shifted. No longer was Aaliyah Carter a suspended student accused of dishonesty. She was now a symbol of resilience, a mirror reflecting the system's failures, and a beacon for those who had been silenced. At home that night, Danielle tucked Marcus into bed before sitting beside her daughter at the kitchen table. Aaliyah's face was pale, her body still buzzing from adrenaline. "You did good," Danielle whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You spoke for more than yourself. You spoke for generations." Danielle took her hands gently. "Baby girl, you don't have to fix everything. You just have to keep telling the truth. That's more powerful than you realize." "This is the governor's office," the caller said. "We'd like to speak with Miss Carter directly." Danielle froze, the phone trembling in her hand. She passed it slowly to her daughter. Aaliyah pressed it to her ear, her heart hammering. "This is Aaliyah," she said softly. The voice on the line was calm, official. "Miss Carter, the governor has been following your story. After last night's speech, he would like to meet with you personally. We believe you could play a role in shaping future education policy for this state." Aaliyah's eyes widened. Her mother gasped audibly, her hand flying to her chest. The line crackled, and the voice continued. "We want to invite you to the Capitol next week. The governor believes it's time to let you help decide what happens next." The call from the governor's office had left the Carters in stunned silence. Aaliyah set the phone down slowly, her hands trembling, her mind spinning with disbelief. Danielle pressed her palms together as if in prayer, whispering, "Baby girl, they see you now. They really see you." The following week unfolded like a dream. Aaliyah was invited to the state capitol, where she met not just the governor, but education leaders and policy advisors. She sat at a long oak table, her medal around her neck, answering questions with quiet confidence. They asked her about her experiences, about barriers she faced, about what changes students like her needed most. She didn't speak like a politician. She spoke like a girl who had been silenced and had found her voice again. "Don't just fix the cracks," she said firmly. "Change the foundation." 2 months later, under the blazing lights of the Capitol Auditorium, Aaliyah stood on stage again, this time not for a math competition, but to receive the governor's award for academic excellence, the highest academic honor in the state. The governor himself placed the plaque in her hands, his voice carrying across the packed room. "Tonight we honor Miss Aaliyah Carter, whose courage, brilliance, and perseverance have inspired an entire state to rethink what it means to give every child a fair chance." The crowd rose to its feet. The applause thundered. Danielle sobbed openly in the front row, Marcus grinning so wide it looked painful. Cameras flashed, news anchors narrated, and for once the world was not debating her worth. It was celebrating it. But the most surreal moment came weeks later, when the district announced plans for a new honor wall at Eastview High, a display dedicated to students who had achieved state and national recognition. Aaliyah's name was to be engraved at the very top. The irony wasn't lost on her. The same school that had once tried to erase her was now forced to carve her name into its walls. On the day of the unveiling, the auditorium was filled with students, teachers, parents, and press. The new interim principal, a soft-spoken woman named Dr. Harris, spoke of new beginnings and accountability. She gestured to Aaliyah, who stood quietly with her family near the front. When the curtain dropped, revealing the plaque with Aaliyah Carter, State Academic Excellence Award, the crowd erupted. Students pointed, some whispering in awe, others clapping despite themselves. For the first time, Aaliyah didn't shrink. She stood tall, her eyes fixed on her own name etched into permanence. Later, as the crowd dispersed, she walked slowly down the hallway. Her footsteps echoed against the linoleum, memories rising with every step. And then she stopped. In front of her was the same office door where it had all begun. Principal Hawthorne's old office. The wood was the same, the brass handle unchanged. She remembered the weight of her application in her hands. The sting of his words, "Students like you don't belong." For a long moment, she simply stared. The fear that had once knotted her stomach was gone. Instead, she felt something steadier. Strength, yes, but also sorrow for the years lost, the chances denied, the children who never got to stand where she stood. She whispered to herself, almost like a prayer, not invisible anymore. The media frenzy eventually cooled, but Aaliyah's story remained. Documentaries were pitched, college recruiters sent letters, civil rights organizations asked her to speak at conferences. She became a symbol of what resilience could look like, but she never let them forget the cost. In interviews, she always circled back to the same point. "I shouldn't have been the exception," she said. "I should have been one of many." The real question is, how many others never even got the chance? Those words haunted people. They stuck. They forced parents, teachers, and policymakers to look beyond her story to the quieter, untold ones that would never make the evening news. At home, life returned to something like normal. Danielle still worked long shifts. Marcus still played basketball in the parking lot with his friends. But there was a new kind of pride stitched into the walls of their apartment. The newspaper clippings taped to the fridge weren't just reminders of a fight won, they were a reminder of what could no longer be denied. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Aaliyah sat at her desk, staring at the metal that had once felt like a burden. Now it felt like a responsibility. She opened a fresh notebook and wrote on the first page, "For the ones they never saw." Her story wasn't finished. It was only the beginning. The following year, Eastview High held its first Equity Summit, inviting parents and students to speak about their experiences. Danielle attended, her voice steady, as she shared their fight. Aaliyah spoke too, her words sharper now, more assured. "I was told I didn't belong," she said to a room full of teachers and administrators. "But what I learned is that belonging is not theirs to give, it's ours to claim." Applause filled the gym, and in the back a group of freshmen watched her with wide eyes, whispering among themselves. One of them, a young black boy, turned to his friend and said, "If she can do it, maybe I can too." The story had come full circle. The girl who had once been rejected in silence was now the voice opening doors for others. Yet even as her name gleamed on the school's wall, as accolades poured in, as her future stretched wide with possibility, Aaliyah carried the same question with her everywhere. How many others had been erased before anyone could notice? How many dreams had been buried quietly, long before they ever had the chance to rise? Aaliyah pressed her hand against her engraved name, the metal cool under her fingers. She smiled faintly, not for herself, but for those who never got here. Then she whispered the question out loud, her voice echoing down the empty hallway. How many of us were never given the chance to shine? They tried to silence her, but the truth refused to stay buried. If you believe no child should ever be told they don't belong, let your voice be heard. Type yes if you believe in justice.